Hello and welcome back to another GiantSlayerTV patch rundown video. Today we'll be delving into the latest patch for Set 6, 12.3. This will be the final patch the first half of Set 6 as the mid-set is coming out in just a couple of weeks. Because the mid-set is so soon, they are going extremely light on overall changes in 12.3, especially since they've done a lot of balancing in the 12.2b patch. But there are still a few worthwhile changes to talk about, so let's go ahead and see what those are. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. While the patch notes may be light, there is still some impactful changes being made, two of which are system changes. The first system change that will have ramifications going into the mid-set is a retooling of how Tome of Traits functions. Previously, the way Tome of Traits worked was a set of convoluted rules that didn't quite make any intuitive sense. For the majority of players, they likely had no idea what the rules were or how to best abuse them, but those who did were able to use the tome more effectively. To avoid any confusion and to make the tome less abusable, the tome will now offer tailored emblems based on your total active and inactive traits in the previous combat round. For example, if you have 5 or 6 traits active or inactive and sell the tome, you'll be given one tailored emblem. Tailored meaning it will be one of those traits. The more traits you have prior to selling the tome, the more tailored emblems you'll be given as options. This caps out at 11 or more, as that provides 4 tailored emblems. We recommend reading through the patch notes to see the full list of tailored emblem rules, but the basic idea of it is simple enough to understand. The more traits you have, the more tailored emblems will show up. What does this mean moving forward? Mainly that with more intuitive rules for the tome, players will be able to make more informed decisions. Wait a few rounds to have a few more traits on your board and then have a better chance of getting an emblem you want. And it should lead to fewer players instantly selling any tomes they get early game unless they really just want a bunch of random emblems to choose from. The other system change to talk about is going to definitely be impactful into the mid-set, as they've adjusted trait-linked augments, specifically prismatic tier augments. This is fairly simple to break down, but essentially what they've done is that Crown and Soul augments are no longer offered as second or third augment choices unless you have the first trait tier active. The example they use is Arcanist. If a player has 2 Arcanist active, they can be offered an Arcanist crowned. If it is not active, then it won't appear. Basically, the reason for this is that it doesn't feel great to be presented with a trait-specific augment that have no bearing on your current board later on in the game. Oftentimes, it feels like you're given dead options to choose from, meanwhile, someone is getting an extremely useful augment for their board. While yes, variance is still a thing, especially with augments, the goal here is to reduce the variance in specific situations. It just doesn't feel great to get shafted because of poorly implemented systems. It's worth noting that there are exceptions, such as mutants only need 2 mutants in play to have a crown offered, same for mercenary. But in general, this won't happen for the majority of boards, and that's good. Continued tweaking of when augments can appear is definitely an ongoing process, and honestly, it's unlikely they'll be completely done with it when Set 6 fully comes to an end. But they have teased that Set 7 is likely to continue with the augments system, so think of Set 6 as a beta period for augments. Even though the system needs a lot of work and balance is a huge factor, eventually it's going to be too lit. The rest of the patch is relatively short, though there are quite a few augment changes to talk about. Keep in mind that augment balancing done in this patch is likely to affect the mid-set as well. You may have guessed it, but the first augment change is to Ancient Archives. With changes done to the Tome of Traits making it easier to use but less abusable, they've lowered this augment down 1 tier to Silver from Gold. This makes a lot of sense as there's less control over what emblems you can get from the tome, even though it's overall much more intuitive after the changes. This honestly helps Ancient Archives a lot, as while it wasn't a terrible gold augment, it definitely had a lot of competition. It certainly fits with the theme of silver augments being more generalized. Next up is a nerf to tiers 1 and 2 of Exiles. Exile isn't always the best option, but sometimes it's the only one. Because of that, the augment has always been slightly overtuned since it does alter a lot of positioning. In a meta where assassins are doing well, Exiles is even more valuable because assassins are more freeform with positioning, as are a few other compositions like challengers. The nerf isn't massive, but they are reducing the percent health shield by 5% from both tiers. Ultimately, this won't make a huge difference in when you take Exiles, but it's usually the best option when the 2 other augments are meh. Featherweight is really good at win streaking, but maybe too good? It must be, as they are reducing the bonus attack speed down to 25, 35, 55% from 30, 40, 60%. 5% nerf isn't the end of the world for this augment, but keep in mind the attack speed can have crazy scaling, so 5% nerf can be quite noticeable. Still, Featherweight is likely to continue being useful in the early game when trying to win streak. Perhaps with Morello's and Sunfire K being slammed less, Shargadoff was overperforming due to the lack of healing reduction being used. Whatever the reason, they've lowered the health regen down to 2.5% from 3%. Boosters are definitely doing well in the meta, but it's really not because of this augment, so in all likelihood, this nerf won't be all that impactful. Sunfire board continues to be a balancing nightmare as they've decided to bump up its numbers to a 10-second duration and 20% damage. This augment really showcases how difficult it is to balance the augment system because it's been flip-flopped around so many times, and honestly we expect to see it nerfed again in the future because that's just the pattern so far. On the plus side, Sunfire board is at least pickable again instead of being a completely dead augment you only took in rare situations. Interestingly, they're buffing Thrill of the Hunt. Perhaps it's a case of perception versus data, as most high-ranked players would agree that Thrill of the Hunt is a decent augment, as instant healing is often more impactful than passive healing like Celestial. But it seems that their data suggests otherwise, and as such, they're buffing Tier 1 and Tier 2 of this augment to heal 400-700 from 300-600. It's not a massive increase in healing, but as we said, it likely wasn't necessary. All this does is make Thrill even stronger than before and solidifies it as a go-to option when the other augment options are lackluster. It seems that they really have an out for healing augments this patch, as up next is a minor nerf to underdogs. Perhaps it's because of Cho'Gath 3 they're going all in on healing augments most commonly associated with him. In any case, the nerf is small as the regen is going down to 9% from 10%. Underdogs should still be plenty effective early on in the game, especially on bruiser champions. Weirdly enough, they've once again buffed High Roller as it's going from a bonus of 4 gold to 8. This must be another perception versus data change again, as High Roller is not a bad prismatic item that it has needed multiple buffs. Likely what the issue is with High Rollers, the majority of players don't know how to effectively use loaded dice and just slam it at random times or on the wrong champions. Much like the Toma traits, high-ranked players know how to best abuse this augments, as 3 loaded dice can be game-changing. We definitely don't agree with this buff, but it does at least make sense with a broader perspective. That said, we recommend looking up loaded dice, as there are plenty of resources to use it more effectively if you're unsure how to best use this augment. Knife's Edge can be slightly too good at higher tiers, so they're bumping the bonus AD down 5 for tier 2 and 3. This augment can be amazing for certain compositions, specifically assassins and challengers. 5 less attack damage shouldn't make it unplayable, but may at least cause players to think about which augment they want instead of insta-picking Knife's Edge. Mercenary Heart no longer grants 1 gold. Good. Mercenary Heart didn't need any help with generating gold. Similarly, Socialite Heart no longer grants 1 gold. 1 gold really doesn't matter, but they probably could have just left it in. And the final augment changes to Windfall. At tier 1, Windfall got nerfed severely to the point where it's not always the best option on 1-4. To make it more appealing, they buffed the gold up to 18 from 15. Honestly, this is fine, but Windfall is still a really good prismatic because an influx of 15 gold on 1-4 is insane. Overall, probably not necessary, but again, they balance a lot based on data, which likely comes into play here. With that, let's move on to the trait changes. There's not many here, as the only large trait change is to Socialite 2. It's a small buff, but they've increased the mana generation for 2 Socialites from 3 to 4. Maybe 5 would have been better, because Socialite is generally only used because one champion grants your carry 20% extra damage. An okay buff, but affects the mid-set more than the current meta. Bodyguard is getting far more of an impactful buff, as the bonus armor is going up to 80-160 from 75-150. Okay, far more impactful is maybe an overstatement, but a buff is a buff, and Bodyguard gaining more armor just means they're more playable besides just Braum. Across the board, this should help the trait be more usable, especially early game Bodyguard champions like Poppy and Darius. And the last trait change is the 7 Innovators. The bonus critical strike damage is going down to 30% from 40%. They may need to make more changes in the future to 7 Innovators, but this is a good start, as the dragon adds so much to an Innovator board. Extra damage, CC, and it has a ton of health, plus the champion composition is usually full of utility champions like Seraphine, Orianna, and Janna. While yes, it can be difficult to consistently end up with a capped Innovator board, the fact is when a player does hit 7 Innovators, they often end up winning the game relatively easy. This one nerf isn't likely to change that, but incremental changes are definitely a better approach than just one massive nerf that completely ruins the synergy. There's only one champion change this patch, and that's to Swain. Swain's max mana is going up to 85 from 80, which slightly slows down how often he'll cast in a fight. They say that Swain is still doing well in the early game, but honestly, the Imperial nerfs and the nerfs to Swain in the 12.2b patch were plenty. Continuing to nerf him at this point is just plain mean. In the last section of the patch are minor item changes. By items, we mean only one, as it's just Runaan's Hurricane being adjusted in this patch, with the attack damage scaling going down to 70% from 75%. This makes sense considering there are a lot of AD champions that use Runaan's effectively, but it probably didn't need a nerf. In any case, Runaan's is likely to remain a staple on champions like Yone and Urgot because of just how effective an item it is for them. That's it for today's video, folks. Due to the small amount of actual balance changes, that means the 12.3 meta should mostly be a continuation of what we've already seen since the 12.2b patch. A lot of the adjustments this time around are more likely to affect the mid set than the current meta. Let us know in the comment section below what changes you're excited to see in the upcoming mid-set. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.